Hello and welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. Today we have Breno Helfstein Moura from Palantir here on the pod. So Palantir is a tech company best known for its work as a defense contractor. You may remember hearing about them from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So what the heck are we doing talking to Breno today and about travel? Well, it turns out that there is more to Palantir's story than meets the eye. They have a large, growing commercial side of the business, and travel is increasingly a focus for them. So Breno helps lead the Palantir travel efforts. And Breno, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's great being here. Yeah, and talking a little bit about Palantir and our work and our story. So yeah, very excited to be telling a little bit about also what we do on the travel industry.
So before we get into it, quick note for all of you who are listening out there, please send any questions or comments that you have to podcasts@skift.com. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you're enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave a positive review because it helps us spread the word about the Skift Travel Podcast. So Seth, I kind of forgot to say hello to you. Hi.
Oh, it's okay, doing? Sarah. I'm good. I think we've both been busy with a lot of travel, but that's my favorite part of the job, you know? So
I know, right? And I'm about to take off and go to Bangkok and I don't even know. I don't know. It's on my calendar. I get a ping. It tells me where I have to go. I think I've said it before. My suitcase hasn't been unpacked for the last 6 months. Yeah. It's just here waiting for me.
There's a reason why we talk about jet lag apps so often on this show. It's because we're constantly in different time zones.
Yeah. I just get notifications and I use Time Shifter. I don't know if Breno or Seth, you guys use that, but it's a little bossy, but I appreciate that. It's like, go to sleep now for the next 9 hours. I'm so optimistic. Time Shifter. So yeah.
Yeah, Breno, you travel a lot too, right?
Yeah, I travel particularly a lot, but we at Palantir all travel a lot. Kind of we are always going on site at customers. We're also a very international company, so I work it across US, UK, Korea, South America, in Brazil as well. So we do travel a lot.
Oh yeah, and I will say Time Shifter is not affiliated with Skift at all, but it is I talk about it so much that one might think that maybe they should be. Hello, Time Shifter.
Yeah, if you're listening, Time Shifter, please sponsor the podcast, and we can say this is officially brought to you by Time Shifter.
But it's such a cool app. They developed it with NASA to help astronauts time shift in space when there is absolutely no light and dark, right? So it's super
Sarah,
cool.
That's a great example of a government tech company that started working with the government that brought some government-sponsored innovation into the travel industry, which is, I'm going to use it as a segue if you don't mind. That's a bit contrived. I'm going to try and segue that into this first question of the conversation. So Sarah was alluding to this in the intro. A lot of people probably don't know who Palantir is. You're actually a very large publicly traded company. And if they do know you, they know you as a defense contractor. So the first question to you, Breno, is maybe the most simple, but also the most obvious, which is what's a defense contractor doing in the travel industry? And why am I wrong about you guys being a defense contractor? So tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, it's completely right. We are a defense contractor, it's where Palantir was born. So Palantir was founded with the origins in the US government being a contractor, working with defense and intelligence agencies, basically with the premise that a lot of the problems on the intelligence and defense space could be solved with data unification between different organizations in essence, right? So you work under that premise, and they're protecting the West and preventing terrorist attacks, for example, and so on. And then from there, in the middle, we started working with commercial institutions, and which led as we are today. So we have had big partnerships. I'll talk a little bit about a few of them, but yeah, we have huge partnerships on the commercial space, Airbus or BP, or in the US we have several, and it came as the results and the company we have today.
So what is the big travel draw? For all of our audience listening, it's mostly travel executives. How would they probably cross with your company?
Good question. So basically, like the way I like to describe Palantir, and I think like this kind of like spins across as well, like government and commercial, is like Palantir, we are problem solvers and we solve problems through data, through tech, software, and AI mostly, as we may have seen lately. And that kind of like the government has these problems, right? Has its opportunities, and the commercial sector also has its problems, its opportunities, right? So when we speak about the travel industry, that like might range very in a very big range. So like it could be like revenue management, like improving the rates of a hotel or of an airline, right? It could be helping maintenance of aircrafts on the ground. But it also could be, for example, helping supply chain, helping like all those companies purchase better and like purchase cheaper, right? So it really like kind of like depends company to company. We partner deeply to solve the specific partners' problems, and that is the same in like government with like the U.S. government and its agencies, or in the Western world with like other governments, but also in the commercial sector, right? Kind of like when we partner with a company like Airbus or BP, right? Like we are partnering with them to solve like their hardest problems, and yeah, that's mostly what we do.
So I'm curious. So you have a founder and CEO, Alex Karp, who likes to court controversy. Can we agree on that just up front? Yeah.
I mean, he is opinionated. So yeah, he has his opinions and they're all public. But yeah, and he spins across the company. Like we are all very opinionated people, I would say.
Yeah. So he once testified before Congress that his company, quote, occasionally kills people. Um, does that, when he says stuff like that, does that help you, hurt you? Do clients ever bring it up? I'm just curious.
Yeah, customers. I mean, I would say like never bring it up. Palantir like is a company that like uphold its values, right? Kind of like Carp speaks very public about it, and kind of like it kind of is a company that chooses sides, right? Kind of like Carp's not ashamed to or like afraid to say anything. And I think it's great. And kind of like in a segue, kind of like when you talk about like the commercial sector, it spins down to like the culture of the company as well. It's kind of like the company is also very horizontal, and we speak up and we speak our minds and our opinions. And that's also like including like when we go to a customer solving their hardest problem, like we go in and we integrate data and then like we clean them. And then if we come to a conclusion that might not be what the customer wants to hear, like we kind of like uphold that and bring that up to kind of like what we believe it's right. So I think like that's kind of also part of the culture.
So it sounds like you're the type of person that really likes a hard problem. What's the one that excites you the most? Like, what's the hardest problem that you've been able to fix?
That's a good one. I would say like all companies have hard problems, and like they are all different in its shapes and forms. I have to think about the hardest one, the coolest one, the few that I'm like, I mean, a lot of them I'm like, very proud of, but like, one I'm very proud of. It's kind of like talking about like guest experience in the luxury sector. Like when I hear kind of like I heard a lot about like Skift and the other kind of like podcast, and like a lot is talking about like data in the travel industry, and it's a lot about like consumer AI, right, or chatbots or like things that on that shape. And Palantir really focuses on kind of the type of problem and the type of solution and AI deployment that solves operational problems for those customers, right? So when we speak, and like kind of like I think like one story that I think is very kind of like it's a good example of that is our partnership with Airbus. So our partnership with Airbus is like a very big partnership nowadays, and like it has a lot of like public information about it online. And like we have a joint venture with Airbus that's called Skywise. So every single plane that we ever flew, that's an Airbus, so like an A320 that you might be flying like domestic flight in the US, or an A380 that you're flying like a long haul flight. Who knows, right? Like all those planes kind of like are managed and kind of like are integrated into these joint ventures, Skywise, and like the maintenance and like kind of like it has contains data and AI to kind of keep it in shape, right? When we started working with Airbus, we didn't solve this very cool problem, right? Like deploying software across all the airlines in the world is like an amazing problem, as you can imagine, or an amazing kind of like work to do. We can like we of course we had to at that time like our engineers flew across like the world, kind of like deploying for each airline. But when we started kind of like helping them speed up their production of their A350. So they really wanted to speed up. As you can imagine, like kind of like Airbus has like amazing engineers. So like everyone was like kind of like on the ground there to speed up. And like they had this hurdle, which like they couldn't bring the different data source to the same place. Our CEO met them and kind of like, oh, we are very good at that, kind of like bringing data together. We are already doing that for the government. Like we had a few examples, kind of like we came in to solve this problem. And after that, kind of like we begin to grow up and kind of like increase the ambition of like what we did there. So I think like that's a story that of course I'm very very proud of. I was talking the first one about guest experience. There's another one that like that one particularly I was involved with. I wasn't in the Airbus work, but the other ones with a luxury hotel is where we supported them kind of like end to end, kind of like luxury tracking. So for example, they had like a lot of like very VIP customers, which like specific type of wine or a specific type of food, and sometimes those you have to order in advance. And we integrated like end to end their kind of supply chain. So for example, when they had this specific customer that like this specific type of champagne that is maybe imported on that property, they were like, okay, this customer will order that champagne, and if we don't have it, we have to serve something else. So we integrated end to end, so they had the thing on the shelf when they needed it. So that one I was very proud of because like it is a cool story. Like when I arrive, I think like they have like they know I like this and like it's here because they know. And I think like that is very, very powerful.
We've had so many people on the pod talk about like almost this exact thing and this exact problem. Like especially when we talk to like super high end luxury VIP outfits, they've kind of brought this type of thing up, like anticipating the needs of their ultra high net worth clients and like how are they going to get that champagne to like I don't know, an island off New Zealand where they're, like all of that kind of stuff. Like it's not the first time we've heard this story. And I think for Seth and I,
It's not the first time we've heard the story, but what's cool about it is it's maybe the first time we've heard the story from like a really big data and AI company where it's like, all right, if you can predict when an engine's going to blow on not blow, that's the wrong way to put it. If you can predict when an engine's going to need maintenance on an Airbus, let me phrase this as a question. Is it harder or easier to predict if the customer is going to want champagne? In some ways, I might even say it's harder to predict what the customer wants. Like humans are so unique. Like when you think about those as data and as Palantir problems, like what goes into solving making that work? Like it's not magic. You need to make it happen, right?
Exactly. And I think like kind of like that's a good point that you brought up about like kind of like predicting. And a lot of people kind of like, so how Palantir usually do those like kind of like problem solution is we do it through data integration. So we bring, as you can imagine, like that example that I gave, kind of like a luxury brand resort. So that one was the Nai resort. So kind of like we had to integrate like data sources from different sources. So as you can imagine, like the PMS and like from different properties, all the PMSs, right? You have to integrate also the procurement systems, which are specific procurement systems that these companies have. You also need to integrate their ERP, maybe finance, right? And like kind of like to ship an order form and all of those data sources together in the same place. Once we integrate them, we also have to clean the data. As you can imagine, like maybe when you are buying something, some people write champagne and some people do a typo. Some people forget the G. Like I'm those type of people. So like kind of like we have data and like kind of like what is sometimes called dirty data. And like everyone saw that. And like if you see a PMS screen once in your life, kind of like it's not everyone like, oh, I enjoy typing here. So sometimes you get like things there. And like we clean the data and we make it the accurate and we make it good and we put it on something that we call the ontology, which we call it kind of like the nouns and verbs of your business. So those, as you can imagine, it is like when we think about like a hotel, for example, and I'm bringing the example of hotel, but as you can imagine, the same example applies for like car rentals. It's also like big customers of ours, or airlines and so on. But like when you think about a hotel, for example, we're thinking about kind of like a guest, which is a customer, right? You're thinking about a property. You were thinking about the staff and like kind of like what's the people inside your property? What is the room that this guest at? Did they submit a review? What is the things that need to buy into this hotel, the food and beverage, and so on. And like all of those things are important for the business. So like maybe the owner calls someone on the ground and say like, hey, do we have that specific type of champagne? Because like this customer needs, kind of the ontology is the layer that connects everything in the same place. So like maybe you know that Seth is coming to this property and Seth likes this champagne because we know that he ordered it in the past. And kind of like, okay, it is coming already to this property and we will
Only the
arrive.
best, only the
Only
finest.
the finest, exactly. And like kind of like I think like connecting the data is ultimately the hardest part, I would say. And then like from there you collect and like we can do a lot of like the cool stuff. So like predicting is one of them, but also like connecting AI with generative AI. So we can do things like an automated agent to read your reviews or to read your call center logs or and like so on. So like the powerful things come like of course after that layer, but that layer is the thing that we build across many years and translates kind of like across industries.
One of the things we hear this a lot, which is that like in some ways the prediction is the easy part and the data is the hard part. And what I'm hearing from you is that it doesn't really sound like Palantir is a piece of software, like a traditional. Like I would buy a video game, or I'd buy QuickBooks, or I would buy whatever, Oracle, a property management system. It doesn't sound to me like Palantir is really a piece of software. You almost sound like a consultant company. Like it sounds like. Is that correct? And then the follow up is that correct? Is that the right way to be thinking about it? Like you say, you pretty much do everything fairly custom, or that's just because of how the data is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say like Palantir is not a consultancy company, but Palantir is ultimately a software company. We build software and we solve problems through that software. And like we build them in a very opinionated way. So like bringing back kind of like you were asking me about Carp, and I was talking like our company is like very opinionated. And there's this analogy that Carp loves, which is kind of like that our engineers, and we call ourselves a FDE, so for deployed engineers, that we are like kind of like French waiters, or kind of like inspired on the French waiter. So kind of like if you go to a French waiter and you order the wrong type of wine for the fish you were ordering, what he'll say like, no, I'll not do that. I'll make sure you have the best experience possible, and I'll bring you the best wine for that fish, right? And kind of like in a very opinionated way. So like he says that like we are inspired from that, and like the reason why they do that, like why the French waiters do that, is because like they're an integral part of the kitchen, right? So like they're integral part end to end, and that's actually what we do. We are a software company, but like our engineers that are on the front line, so kind of like the for deployed engineers, are also part of the product. So kind of like it's the same thing, and we are building them end to end. And I think like I really like the knowledge because I think it answers your question there, Seth, of like kind of like, are you guys a consultants company or are you guys a software company? Like we build software ultimately, but like we build them on a different way and on a very unique way, which is I think like kind of like what differentiate us.
I mean, so are you guys hotel software snobs? You feel like there's a right way to do it, and you're out on a mission to prove the world that this French wine, this Bordeaux, is the best wine in the world, and it goes with this dish and this whatever.
I mean, you could see it in that way. I think like the way I like to see it is not that like kind of like we know better, and like is be snobbing about like kind of like we know the best. I would say like kind of like we will make sure
but you do know
that
better.
our
That's the
partners
thing.
or the
But you
company.
do know better.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we are opinionated. Like kind of like we want to make sure our customers have the best results, and like we'll do everything for that to happen. And like if that is finding what is the best champagne to campaign, or like what is the best product, like we'll find that out. And I don't know if that is like being snob, but yeah, I would say like that. That's kind of like the premise there.
Data snob. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm a data snob. I do a lot of research, and I'm a data snob. I have an opinionated way about how to collect and pull and analyze data. But we won't call it snob. I guess that's negative. I can already hear. I don't want to get you in trouble or anything. You guys, I like that. I think that that's an important point. That sometimes, I mean, I guess I would ask you this as a question, but like, I guess an important point, which is that for companies that are considering their data and AI strategies, is the dream of an off-the-shelf plug-and-play software solution possible, or are they going to have to do these sort of processes of figuring out, it's harder work than just buying a piece of software, right? I mean, tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. To that, like I mean, I lived through different customers on different industries, and like I mean, you guys work in hospitality, so you know better than I do. Like kind of like imagine when you do a PMS transition, right, or an ERP transition. Those usually like you can think, oh, it's off the shelf, everyone uses it. It's kind of like I'll just like swap mine, and then like it just work fine. What it actually happens is like kind of like you have the beginning of the project, and then like kind of like you have to accelerate it, and like what ends up to being a simple swap sometimes become like multi-year projects that ultimately don't deliver results, right? So that's kind of like one way, and like the Palantir way, which is like accelerating through the journey of like kind of like the ERP or like the PMS is like that's like one example of like a tech journey that I would just say like is not as fast or as cheap as people think, because people think that the shelf software is cheap because they only see the price of the license, but there's like a hidden cost or something behind it that sometimes they don't see, right? And what Palantir do is like, okay, that's how much like that's what we need to solve your problem, and that's like how we do it, and that's how that's our suggestion, that's our recommendation of how we would solve your problem, and then we come in and we would accelerate you for that journey. So like things that sometimes are projects that would take months, we cut that down to weeks.
And welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. We are talking with Breno from Palantir. So our Data and AI Summit is coming up for 2025 in just a few weeks on June 4th in New York City. And as we look ahead to that event, I'm really curious what you think are some of the biggest AI-driven trends that you're seeing that we will inevitably be talking about at the summit. Like give us a little peek into what you are seeing out there with your clients and just when you're talking with other kind of people that are really, ensconced in the AI world.
Good question. Awesome. Yeah, there is like different trends on different spaces, right? So like there's a lot of like trends on the kind of like in the AI space for the consumer, right? It's kind of like people talk a lot about kind of like how the consumer kind of like buying products will change. What I have seen kind of like on the Palantir side is kind of like we work a lot of like operational software, and like people talk a lot about kind of like a few topics, and like I'll talk about a few products that we have kind of like for those. So one of them is like on procurement and supply chain, kind of like on buying side of products, right? Which is like really impacts kind of the margin and operational of any business. And that has been like being talked a lot because there's like real results that you can achieve in a very, very short time frame, right? And it's really like AI unlocks that power in a lot of the ways, because like you can collect data from places that previously without AI you couldn't, right? Like for example, manual invoices or PDFs. Like you can collect those data and you can bring them to a semantic layer in a very, very quick way, and that like kind of like makes it really powerful. Other like kind of like trends, and like there's other things. It's kind of like on the revenue management side, kind of like sales and marketing, like kind of like we scope use cases on like rate optimization and like kind of like marketing optimization, like targeted marketing campaigns and like channel optimization or marketing. So there's a lot of things there. I haven't seen like one single focus, so it really depends on company to company. So that's like kind of like another one that I have seen. One that also like is super super trendy and like kind of like works a lot is kind of like our customer service engine. So like it's our work with like call centers and like places who answers customer service, and that's not only like travel industry, that's across like retail in general. And it's really like a need that is a necessity, and like what we can do there, and like it's also like super powerful with AI. It's kind of like we can read the underlying data, the internal sources like the SOPs or the FAQs or so on, and kind of like make your agents perform better. And like where your agents are not needed, we can automate them, but kind of like you want your agents to perform on the hardest task that maybe you don't want a human, or you want a human in the loop always, because like you don't want to automate away, for example, benefits or something like some stuff. So you always want a human in the loop, and we are very good on like, those types of workflow as well, where like you have AI, so you have AI enablement, but you also have a human in the loop to assert the goal of that AI.
Do we need to be worried about AI taking our jobs when you talk about AI agents and that sort of stuff? I mean, what's your thought on that topic?
Yeah, good question there. So the way we see it is kind of like not that the AI will take everyone's jobs and like will automate away jobs. It's not that. What exactly like kind of like we do is like we enable the human to perform at its best, right? There's an analogy, and like I really like this analogy as well. It's like when I joined Palantir, we had this guy that gave this culture talk about it and kind of like about the philosophy of Palantir, right? And the way is that there's a story when the AI won the chess championship. So the AI won Garry Kasparov. I think everyone remembers that. Like Deep Blue went there and like won the best champion. And then people thought like, okay, we are done. There's no chess anymore. Human players are done. Like we can't do this. So there is that story there where like humans play chess and then the AI came in and like the AI played chess better than humans, right? And at sometimes like kind of like you have the AI competing there, but when you have kind of like a human paired with an AI, it really like surpasses, right? Kind of like it increases the potential. So like if you have a best player in the world and like you pair him with an AI, he will perform better than the AI, right? And like that's I think like kind of the mentality of Palantir is like we want to partner the humans with the AI and with the technology so they perform their best, right? Kind of like you want to make everyone perform at the highest level possible on your company or on your institution or your business.
I buy that. I mean, just from my experience as a journalist and a writer, AI writing is, I don't know, it lacks interest. AI still isn't very funny. It can't do jokes. It can't do like a lot of that type of stuff, but it certainly can help you so much, like get going, organize, get flow, outlines, all of that good stuff. So,
It deeply
uh,
accelerates your journey, right? Like
yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
journalism is a great example. Like you have a writing journey, kind of like you know what sounds best and what looks best, and kind of like the AI doesn't have the human judgment. It is an automated judgment, and sometimes that's enough for a few things. But for a lot of things, you want the human in the loop, and like we are really good at that part.
We were doing this summit, and it's called the Data and AI Summit, and we touched upon data a little bit earlier. I wanted to dig into it. We specifically call it the Data and AI Summit because we almost call it the AI and Data Summit. And our CEO and founder, Rafat, was like, data has to come first. It has to be the Data and AI Summit. And you used this word on the first half of the show. You said the word ontology, which is, as a writer, it's a $10 word. I want to cut it. I want a $1 word or cheaper instead of a $10 word. And my understanding from our conversations is that ontology really has to do with data readiness. So give us that, explain that in plain English, no word longer than 2 syllables. What is an ontology and what does it have to do with data readiness, and why is it so important to do it for companies starting their data journey?
Yeah, I would say the ontology is your vocabulary, is your words, right? What is the words that you need, and what's the words that you want to teach the machine, the AI, right? So we say like nouns and verbs, but like you can think of words literally like your vocabulary. What's the business? What's the vocabulary of your business, right? Because like I'll give you an example. If you come and like, of course, we build a lot more than chats. We don't build chats like that's not like chatbot. But like if you think about in a chat world, just to do that analogy, because I think it's a good for a moment there. If you ask it like kind of like uh, how like kind of like internal questions about your business, right? So like, what is my revenue at this time, or how much I'm spending with this product? If you go to any like LLM, large language model, and you ask that, you not come back with your answer, right? You come back with like something general, or maybe it even hallucinates. However, if it knows your vocabulary, if it knows like what is it spending, what is the product, kind of like organizing in that shape, it'll be able to go after the data and retrieve it to you and give it to you that information in a very fast and easy way. And that's I think what the ontology is about. It's about organizing your data, organizing your internal knowledge, and like kind of like organizing your words of your business, right? And then once you have that, then you can do more, right?
When you start to do that, do you find that there's internal disagreement? Is everyone often on the same page, or do you find that there's different definitions of revenue and margin and cost and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Sometimes there is, and like kind of like we tend to work with like the business and like kind of like the tech, kind of like both areas. And sometimes like there is disagreement. Like the tech wants one definition, the business wants another definition, and kind of like we have to reach an agreement. And that's also kind of like one of the principles is like everyone should have the same view. So everyone should have the same source of truth, the same principles there. You shouldn't be saying like, oh, the revenue for accounting is that, but the revenue for the business is that, but the CEO like the other number, and like
Yeah.
each one like likes one. That usually doesn't go well. So like we like everyone having the same information, the same source of truth, and yeah. So that's also like part of it.
So I'm putting some words in your mouth, but it's an interesting point for me that I think about is that everyone wants to talk about AI, but the way to get really good AI is to get really good data. And then everyone wants to just outsource the data problem, but the data is actually as much a culture problem in some cases as it is an Excel sheet problem. Like I think that's an interesting. We're working a little bit backwards, but before we can do these really cool things with AI, and you need the systems, but sometimes the systems are built. Yeah, I think it's interesting that so much of it actually can come down to culture and to just doing the hard work of getting everyone on the same page in your culture. In
Well,
your
to put it in like non-technical terms, it's like the same as when you hear that ChatGPT or any of the like publicly sourced large language models are racist, right?
Yeah.
It's because humans are, right? Like all of the words that we use to populate those are. So it's just using what we give it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if your systems, if your company's AI is confused, maybe it's because your people are confused and your employees are confused and your organization is confused. It's kind of maybe sometimes a mirror back. It just gives us back what we put into it.
Black Mirror. Yeah. Well, speaking of which, so as we kind of like run headlong into the singularity, what do you think are some of the unintended consequences of AI, especially for the travel biz? Like, is there anything that you see that like, is there a big warning that you could kind of give out? Like, is there anything that you're just like, folks, you shouldn't do it that way. Like, and how do you protect against kind of these unintended consequences that sometimes I think we're so at the beginning. We're so at the
Yeah.
beginning of this, right? So how do you how if you were a business leader listening to this, how can you protect yourself against maybe the problem that you're going to face 5-10 years from now with AI?
Yeah. That's a very good point. Kind of like the AI, they basically like accelerates every single part of the tech journey. That's how I would put it. And kind of like you have the same kind of like like problems that you had in the past in your tech journey. So I'll give you one example, which is like data access, right? So I'll give back an example of the luxury hotel because I think like that really elucidates and it's a very good example. But like you can think of that across every single industry, and like travel specifically is one that is very important. But like, let's say that you have Seth Borko, which is a very famous person. He's staying at the hotel property, and like
He
someone
drinks
goes
very
in and
fancy
search,
French champagne. We know that much
drink
already,
very
right?
French champagne, which is a private information. Maybe you don't want people to know what type of champagne Seth's drink or like where he spends his money, right? And like that data is somewhere in a system in a hotel, right? uh, you don't want that data being misused, right? And that data exists today already. So like that data is being collected on your PMS, on your POS, and kind of like if you tie it together, you can find it. What you really need, kind of like on that journey, is the safeguards that to ensure that the data is used for legitimate purposes. And like in some jurisdictions, like there's legal things there, but like kind of like the idea is the data has to be used for for specific purposes, right? And the Palantir really helps on that journey of like kind of like data security and data handling, right? And that comes, I think, like from the beginning. Like when we talk about like the government work, is imagine like we were working with, like as you said, like our software occasionally was used to kill people or are occasionally used in war, right? So like it's very sensitive environments, right? Our software, like I worked on a project on COVID response, right, for Palantir, and like this is also like very sensitive. So you want the data to be used for the correct reasons, right, or the reasons it's intended to do. So you need the safeguards to ensure that like no data is misused. And like on hospitality is also important that we ensure that like I don't know that Seth champagne type, like champagne preference is safeguarded well.
We don't
And
want
like
that data misused. We
Trade
don't want that
secrets. Trade
information
yeah,
to get
secrets.
out there. Yeah.
yeah. So like and like of course you can think about like 10 other examples. Like I'll not bring them up here, but like kind of like so some things you it is not public like and you yeah and you want to make sure that it stays that way.
So I want to ask, we're coming towards, I guess, the end of our conversation. I want to bring it back towards hotel, I guess specifically hotel tech, but also travel tech. We'll include airlines and Airbus and those folks in there. I mean, this is back to one of our original topics, but like there's a lot of incumbents out there. There are a lot of travel tech companies in distribution and in vendors and in PMS and customer relationship management, CRM, and all sorts of things. I mean, let me ask you, like, you're these opinionated French waiters, you're these pushy French waiters with a strong view about how to do things right. How do you think you're going to compete in this industry? And do you think there's anything people are doing wrong? Like, what are some mistakes that you see from other vendors or from travel tech that if you could tell, you've got an audience, you can tell people, you're doing this wrong. I want to see you do this better. What do people do wrong today? And where do you want to see it done better?
Yeah, I would say like there's a lot of things that kind of like we at Palantir believe like when we enter a business kind of like to support it. And one of them is when you think about kind of like results, like when we join to a company or a partner, we always think about kind of like what is the end result of like this project, like where we want to achieve, what the company expects. And sometimes like we have a lot of like projects in and like this is on many different customers, which are like more of like a science experiment where customers are exploring with something and that's not really what we do and like kind of like not in this space what we believe it's kind of like we want to drive results and want to drive kind of like improvements and kind of like incremental every time and I would say like stay away from the science experiment and like kind of try the real deal is a really important message that yeah that I would love to come across.
I'm curious. The travel industry has never been known as one that's an early adopter of technology. So I'm curious if you think that there's like what are the big lessons the travel that the travel business can take from like retail entertainment or just like big tech in general that they've done right that we haven't quite gotten to.
Yeah, that's a good example. Well, like one thing that I think like they could get from other industries is like you don't need to suffer the entire journey, right? When we look into like other industries, so I work like with many customers like at Palantir, like one example is and like that I think like translates as well to PMS, but I work at once with like kind of like a mainframe at a supermarket, right? So you think like that black screen, you ask things and like kind of like the terminal. It's not really like human friendly. It's like a way to interact with the computer for someone who, of course, is not that used to it. And they went from that to Palantir directly. So like kind of like you don't need to go to the mainframe from like to something else and like kind of like to an ugly form that doesn't work well. And then 10 years from now get to the AI, you can skip the journey. I think like that's something that like a lot of people don't realize that like you can skip the journey. And like if you look into counterparts, right? And like Palantir works with like hospitals, for example, and like oil and gas and like all other industries, they're like are in different levels of like tech adoption but like I think like the core thing that like you can realize looking at these other industries like them, you can skip the journey, right? Manufacturing is another example. Like you can skip the journey.
What do you have any clients that have skipped the journey? Any cool stories, success stories about in travel where you've seen where give us some case studies, some like really successful journeys you've seen.
That's a good question. I don't know if you have any public example on travel industry that I can think of like right now. One example that I can relate to is like kind of like in manufacturing, you have a ton of examples, like kind of like the space that Palantir is really, really big at. And kind of like customers go from literal spreadsheets to Palantir, right? Kind of like you can skip the journey. And that's like everywhere in the manufacturing industry. Kind of like I don't have like one specific example in
Well,
mind.
let me ask you then. Let me ask you a different way. Where do you see the biggest ROI for travel companies? Forgetting a specific example or specific case study. If there was one part of the tech journey where you said you think the travel industry really needs to shift into fast forward gear, what's your dream for which parts of that technology journey would you like to see travel companies adopt?
Okay, yeah, that looks different for every company, but like the example that I would give is like we have, for example, two levers into the business, or like or either you increase revenue or you decrease costs. That's how you achieve ROI. I have a few examples of those, right? To increase revenue, and like that's kind of like what we did for a few companies. You can one example is like you can do revenue management, and like there's a lot of course revenue management software there, but like we can supercharge those to like find the best rates, the best deals, how you do promotions, how you optimize your spend across channels, marketing channels. Is there a channel that's performing better than another? Like how you supercharge that one is a type of customer that's not going to your business that should go to your business, and we can leverage data from like all types of different sources, reviews, data that you kind of like public data and that like maybe you want maybe you have already available in your systems, right? And like all this data we can bring to the same place, and like okay, how will you leverage that to find like where your business can grow, and like how you can leverage that on like kind of like how you can increase your revenue. So that's like one angle. The other angle is like decreasing cost, and like that varies completely different. As you can imagine, like an airline has like a very different spending than like a hotel that has a very different spending from a car rental and so on, and like kind of like how they manage their assets and such. One that like kind of like is across all of them again is like procurement. Procurement is really a strong one, kind of like to drive results, and it's kind of like a problem that I think like every single industry can relate to because everyone spends money, right? And if you can find like kind of like you're spending, you're buying the same thing twice for different prices, and maybe you shouldn't. That's one that like you can clearly find results there.
So, which do you have a favorite, revenue or costs, or like I mean, tell us. You were talking a lot about the revenue side. There's also a lot to be done on the cost side of things, right? I mean, that seems to be where a lot of companies go first because there's just really strong ROIs there, or I don't know. Tell me more about that side of
Yeah,
things.
that's usually like where companies go first because like they want to go after their ROI. Like usually revenue ones kind of like so the other way to think is about of offensive or aggressive use case and more defensive, kind of like how you defend. Like that's another way to think about it. And like kind of like the growing part is good. Like we don't have a favorite. We work with like what is the company's hardest problem, and that like looks different. Like maybe one company wants to improve their loyalty, maybe one company wants to improve like their services, right? And like they might have reasons that in that specific company improving that specific part of the business have significant ROI. And we usually like we partner with like the company's hardest problems. So like, I gave you a few examples there, but like what we really do is like we don't come to a company and say like, hey, like oh, like that's a menu list, you can pick an item. It's kind of like we were saying, like kind of like what exactly like what are you dealing with, like what is your journey, and like where like you are suffering with that you can help, or where you see the opportunity that we can accelerate. It's kind of like we usually go into that mode, and you like the good things like on the kind of like the process the customer can and usually do tests on like a boot camp, which is like a very short time frame. It's like a week. We go in, we send our team, and then we build for that customer on that week so he can see how it works.
I heard a lot of different technologies there. So I heard you talk about revenue management. I heard you talk about guest, kind of reputation management. I heard you talk about sourcing. I heard you talk about loyalty. So I guess it is fair to say that there's a lot of AI use cases, and a lot of travel companies are. I guess we're always a little bit skeptical here at Skift. Like there is a lot of AI going into a lot of travel use cases today as we speak. That's fair to say.
Yeah. There is definitely, and like kind of like as you said, like when you said like what is it specific about the travel industry that kind of like excites me about is the amount of different systems that are sometimes not that useful or sometimes not delivering value, right? And we can bring that and we can supercharge that because the data is there. like you always have data, and you have like a lot of data that's like unstructured. When I mean unstructured is like text-based, like long format, as I think like Sarah was mentioning, kind of like the journalist example, kind of like, oh, read my text and like give me, it's like the same thing, like read my review, read my invoice, like all of those like forms of data that like we can now leverage in a complete different way than we could 5 to 10 years ago, right? And that really unlocks a huge potential and acceleration to any travel business.
So last question, what is your dream vision for AI and data and travel? What's the holy grail there?
Yeah, I mean, good. Like for me, the holy grail is seeing the end-to-end operations. Is having like kind of like the virtual version of a company. I like the hotel example because like I work with hotels. So like for me, the holy grail is like seeing the operation end to end, seeing like the guest entering, where is this food being sourced from? Who is serving that guest? Why is he having a good or bad experience, right? When is he leaving or is she leaving? And like kind of like seeing that end to end journey and kind of like improving that. I think that's like for me, it's really exciting and powerful. So like I'm really like yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Breno Moura. Just a fascinating conversation about how a big defense contractor has got into the travel biz.
Yeah. I mean, it is exciting.
And it's a totally different type of tech company to me. It's that's what's interesting about it, is that it's this different approach to how to solve tech problems rather than buying one off the shelf. So thanks for this conversation. This was a really great one. We are really excited about not just this conversation, not just all of our podcast conversations, but continuing that data and AI conversation. We're going to be continuing those conversations at the Data and AI Summit in New York City on June 4th. So if you listen to this podcast episode and you said, I can't get enough of that, shoot us an email, drop us a note, or come see us in person in New York City.
Yeah, and if you want to reach out to Palantir, the hospitality team, you can also email us at hospitality@palantir.com. And yeah, we're waiting also to hear from you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Breno.
Thank you so much, Breno.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.